Hi, Ben.
Hey, I just heard a Mac boot up.
Sorry.
I just heard a Mac boot
I
sound
know.
there.
Yeah. Having problems with the other laptop, but that's fine. That will be
Sure.
fixed.
All right.
Okay. How are you?
Not too bad. I've had a very busy day.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. Well, RxJS went live today, so yeah, you must have been very, very involved in that.
Yeah, yeah, I was. Yeah, I was. It's the first major release in 3 years, something like that. So,
Okay. When did the previous one go live?
early mid 2018, something like that. So
Okay.
I have to look it up, but it's been a while.
Okay. And didn't you say in one of your tweets earlier that like was it Alpha Zero went live on September 18th, 2019?
Yeah, yeah. So the seven Alpha Zero was September 18th of 2019. So it's been a while since that. I joked that RxJS 7 was older than the pandemic at this point. So
It
it's been around a while.
definitely is, yeah.
Yeah.
But there's one other funny thing about that date. Remember
What's
when we met up in Austin to
Was it
discuss
the same
our
day?
experience? It's the same day. Yeah,
Oh
I know.
wow. Okay.
That's so funny. And then remember we had to postpone the March 2020 RxJS Live, the in-person one,
Yeah, that's
and
right.
we did it in September. It's September 18th as well.
I'm
Another
looking
one. So
forward to
yeah.
this, and this is. I want all my future stuff to be in person though, because I miss like seeing the people. It's a bit of a shame that like once in 3 years we release a major version, and I don't get to like tell an actual audience of people about
Audience.
it.
Yeah, I know.
I
I
have
know.
to
Yeah.
I have to tell my desk and listen to its lack of interest.
Well, at least you're going live, when there's an RxJS live conference, although it's,
Yeah.
virtual.
Right. Right.
It's still, at an RxJS event. So I think that's still pretty good
Right.
rather
Yeah.
than, announcing it somewhere else or not even announcing it, just going live, with it without any
Right.
audience at all.
Just to
So,
fizzle. That's what we did last time. I think like it was
oh,
mentioned maybe at NGConf, but it wasn't like announced or there
mhm.
wasn't any. And in all honesty, too, this was not conference driven development. The conference kind of gave us a spot to aim for, but
Mhm.
we were in beta for more than a year, and uh, it was time. We probably could have done it a week earlier or a week later or whatever, but it was time to get it out. So
Okay. Right. Interesting. So are there a lot of big changes that came in with this release? Uh, Obviously, you're going to
yeah,
talk
yeah.
about release
That's
already.
what I'm going to talk about. If I could give
Yep.
the whole thing away right now, and then people would just
No,
tune out.
no, don't do that. Yeah.
No,
Um.
there were no big changes. We just
Nothing.
published the same
Oh
thing
yeah,
again. It's
there
totally
was
fine.
a tweet, right? There's that bot that was
Yeah,
picking up some of the changes and
yeah,
it was
yeah.
highlighting
It,
what one or two. Was
so
that
yeah,
what?
so it what this bot, and it only picked up the changes that showed up in the change log directly underneath the 7.0 release, which is just the changes since the last RC. And so it looked like
You
we
did
released a
that.
major version. All we did was fix 2 bugs and release it. So that's pretty good.
That's very interesting. Okay, I'm just trying to think. I think we're early, and hopefully Deborah, will be able to join us. I can see the tweets right away about her cat.
Oh
But
yeah,
I'm
that's a
really
shame. That's
hoping,
that's a real shame.
yeah. But I'm really
So
hoping she'll be able to join us.
yeah, it sounded
Okay,
like she was planning on joining us. It sounded like she needs the distraction. So for those of
yeah.
you who are watching, Deborah Carrata had a very old cat that passed away today, and she's having a very bad day. So we'll have to be extra nice to her online.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I'm sure a lot of people are looking forward to her talk as well.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah,
I
and
am.
the funny thing is, originally we were gonna record her talk, and then we both decided, no, we'll do it live.
Do it
And
live.
then
Yeah.
this happened. So okay. But anyway, I think we should just get started with your talk because I'm sure you have a lot.
Yeah, I do, and
You say
it's
you have
it's a
like
shame
eight
that we didn't
slides
pre-record
today.
mine because then we would be able to edit out of all of my fumbling. But I think that maybe it'll enhance the live experience to see me stammer over my words a few times during the talk. That'll be good.
Yeah, but so everybody is aware. Ben and I have been discussing, obviously like conferences and all that, and the plan still is to have an in-person event for London and Asia, and who knows, where else. We obviously don't have a date yet, but as soon as we can do in-person events in the UK, we'll schedule one for London, and we'll see how it goes. Hopefully, people from overseas can travel to the UK by that time, um, because most of our speakers, I think, are outside the UK. So definitely, hopefully, travel bans are like are lesser, at the time. So we'll see how
Hopefully,
it
COVID
goes.
is over by like very soon. Very soon.
Is that your
There's still some
prediction
parts of the
then?
world that are having a really hard time, and my heart goes out to
I
those
know,
folks.
right? Yeah, it doesn't feel like it's going to be over soon. Even though, some countries, like we're lucky, I'm in the UK, you're in the US, and it's getting a little bit better. But given that other parts of the world, are still having really well, war situation, at the moment. It's not going to be over for for
Yeah.
everyone, until everyone's safe. So yeah, hopefully, it gets addressed very soon. And yeah, I just want to mention, Sunil, for example, Sunil Pai, he's doing, I think you and I both donated, and a lot of people from the tech industry donated as well. So Sunil's, doing this massive effort of fundraising. So, folks who are watching, hopefully you can contribute something to help India and other countries as well who are struggling to deal with the situation. All right, so
Sure,
I think
sure. Do what you can. Do what you can. I actually
definitely, yeah,
donated to Sunil's cause myself. So
yeah.
there are some people in dire need in India and Brazil and other places that are being very hard hit by this pandemic right now. So
Yeah,
contribute if you can. I know I could, so I did. And it's important. It's a big deal.
definitely. All right, so I think we better get started with your talk. When do you want to start sharing your
Yeah,
slide?
yeah, absolutely. Get the right window. All right.
Let's see. Okay. All right, that looks good. We finally managed to figure out, how to share you because you've got a very wide screen, right? I
Yeah, I
remember
have
the
a
last
very,
time
very wide screen. So,
you were struggling to make it
yeah.
work. All right, okay, that looks good. So
All right.
I'm gonna love you and leave you, sort of, and I'll let you get on with your talk. And I'll be back at the end of it. Hopefully, we'll have some time for Q&A.
Yep.
So folks who are watching, just get ready with your questions if you've got any. Post it on the YouTube live chat, and we'll pick them up, after Ben's talk if there are any. All right. So Ben, good luck on your talk.
All right. Thank you. All right, everybody. So this is a big deal. Today is the day that RxJS 7 was released. It's not really a coincidence that it's today. We targeted today specifically because of the conference, but it could have been any day around here. It was time to be released. This RxJS 7 has been in beta for more than a year, and in alpha even longer than that. So as I stated earlier when I was talking to Jen, it's been out in alpha for people to play with since September 18th of 2019. So quite some time. Um, My name is Ben Lesh. For those of you who don't know exactly who I am the RxJS team lead. I've been working on RxJS since version 5. I'm currently working at Citadel Securities as a software engineer, and I was formerly on the Angular team at Google. Prior to that, some people might know that I worked at Netflix and many other places before that. I've been doing this for about 20 years. So here's the thing. The big topic today that I'm going to be talking about is RxJS 7, because it was released today, and I want to tell you about all the wonderful things that come with this. And the high level is the number one thing that you should know is it's smaller. It's actually smaller and a bit faster in some spots. And I'm going to tell you about how much smaller it is. There are a lot of fixes to TypeScript typings. This whole major version was the primary goal of it. The getting smaller was great, but the primary goal was to get our TypeScript typings right, because the typings were very much suffering. Originally, RxJS 5 was written around TypeScript 1.8. We tried to evolve over time, and unfortunately, having typings in generics adds an extra layer to your interface that you can introduce breaking changes with. So it's like just another part of your API that we have to maintain, and we really wanted to get updated and get type inference correct. We also made an attempt to make some of the APIs more consistent and fix some of the bugs that were reported about inconsistencies that we couldn't really fix in the last version or without a major release, because people might have been depending on some of those strange behaviors. And we wanted to do another thing, which is move towards consolidating multicasting operators. So this has been an area of a lot of pain for people, is dealing with share replay, that sort of thing. And so we have a plan laid out and some new operators to use with regards to that in RxJS 7. And we have some other new features that I'll talk about as well. So the big story in RxJS, well, aside from the typing stuff, which I think is very important, is that it is a lot smaller. And this was done via a refactor, a 100-point improvement of just going around and individually moving around code, keeping the same tests, keeping the same code, and just kind of moving things around slowly but surely until we got to a place where we could see daylight, and then we were able to refactor larger portions of the code. But it was very much just pushing things around, and it was to make the entire library a lot smaller. It is currently, RxJS 7 is 53% of the size of RxJS 6. So that is, it's 47% smaller, or however you want to put that. It's about half the size of what it was before. And just like for a visual size comparison, you see here on the right, this is if you include all exported features of RxJS, including the new features that landed in RxJS 7. RxJS 7 is, you can see here, about half the size of RxJS 6. So this is a visualization of what would happen if you were to bundle, and this is actually done with an Angular build. So I took an Angular build, I gutted everything else out of it, and just said, okay, use every single operator. And then I focused in on Source Map Explorer to what RxJS output. So you can see in RxJS 6.6, we've got about 93 kilobytes of bundle size here, and this is minified. Now, I took the exact same code and swapped it to RxJS 7, and you can see we've got 53, 51 kilobytes of actual code shipped for RxJS in the bundle. So it's much, much, much smaller. And the thing I want you to notice about this is that if you include every operator, the operators come at like a much, much smaller cost. Now, if you include every single operator in RxJS, it's 52 kilobytes in RxJS 6 and 19 kilobytes in RxJS 7. And that in RxJS 7 actually has more operators. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. Even though we're trying to reduce our surface area temporarily, we did have to increase it a little bit while we deprecated some things. And if you, at the bottom there, you see if you just include some common operators, this is just something I went through one of my projects and was like, okay, here's all the ones I'm using in a production project, and kind of took those out and looked. And in RxJS 6, it was like 10 kilobytes. And this is just for the operators, not for the other supporting things like observable and subject, that sort of thing. And in RxJS 7, it's only 4.1 kilobytes. So much, much smaller and cheaper to use operators. And again, like, how did it get smaller? People might ask. I actually have some other talks about this. I'll try to link after, but it was not a big bang rewrite. So this wasn't like, like Angular redoing Ivy or something like that. This was, there were several attempted rewrites that I did experimentally over the years that a lot of people know about, things like T-Rex and these other things, but those weren't really meant to learn from. And this was really done by, again, just kind of slowly moving code around in our code base and finding smarter ways to do the exact same thing that the current code was doing. And eventually we got to a point where everything was a lot smaller. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about in RxJS 7 is we have better TypeScript typings. RxJS 7 requires TypeScript 4.2. So if you are using an older version of TypeScript, you will need to stick with RxJS 6. That's fine. We're still supporting that. We'll be supporting that for as long as we need to. But we're targeting TypeScript 4.2 because it has some features that enabled better TypeScript typings. One thing that we did fix, and this is funny, is in older versions, in RxJS 6 and under, you can create a subject of like a specific type, like number, and then not pass anything to next. And there's a reason behind this. The reason behind this was in TypeScript 1.8, it was deemed to be kind of gross that if you had a subject of void or a subject of undefined, you couldn't call next without passing undefined to it. Like it did not know what to do there. So they fixed that in TypeScript 2.3 or something like that. I don't exactly remember when they fixed it, but we were unable to catch up because it's a breaking change. And like so we had to wait for a major version to fix this. And now in RxJS 7, it's typed correctly. So if you have a subject of number, you can't call next without passing something to it. So if you do want to call next without passing something to it, you need to make sure that your subject accepts void as it's part of its generic. So then you can call it just as you see here, and everything's fine. Another thing that came up, toPromise was actually incorrect. So a long time ago, when there was a lot of debate about how toPromise should behave, and it was decided, and this is specifically, I mean, there was some debate about how it should behave if your observable did not emit any value. Like, so it just completed without emitting a value. What's supposed to happen to promise? Because a promise is a guarantee that you're going to get one value. And if not, it should reject. And it was determined, and it was very split, but it was determined at the time that toPromise should resolve the promise as undefined if it doesn't actually get a value. So here you can see an example where there's this observable that has a 50-50 chance to emit the word Schrodinger, which is like the Schrodinger's cat reference, and then complete. So sometimes it just completes, and sometimes it emits a value and completes. And if you use toPromise with it, like I did in this async function right below, you'll see that my value, it's saying it's always a string, but that's not true because you can see that it's actually emitting undefined in some cases. So this is in version 6. And in version 7, we fixed that to where now toPromise will always return a promise of T or undefined because we have no way of knowing if your observable is going to emit a value or not. And this could cause some pain when you're upgrading because now you're going to have to deal with the fact that toPromise is potentially returning undefined, which means if we're calling dot something on it or whatever right afterwards, it's going to complain. TypeScript's going to complain at you. It's very, very easy to fix for the most part, but it's a little bit painful. Another thing that we're doing in version 7 is we're deprecating toPromise. And this is because of this weird behavior. We don't think it's correct, but we don't want to break people any further than we already have. We just want to make sure that it's typed correctly. And we've introduced 2 new helper methods, which are last value from and first value from, which are not methods on observables. So they're more tree shakeable. You only pay for them if you use them. And you can use these to do the same thing. So last value from and first value from. will actually, they always return a promise of exactly what it is that is a promise of T, and not T or undefined. And they will reject if the with an empty error if the observable does not emit at least one value. And so you can handle this now in a try catch or whatever, which I'm showing here. The other thing is they're configurable. So you can pass a configuration object right after it that says default value empty, or default value 123, or default value whatever you want. And if for some reason you do not get a value from your observable, it will return this default value. So it's a lot more powerful than the other one was. And you'll remember too that toPromise was the last value. So you had to wait not only to get the last value, but then you had to wait even longer for it to complete before you'd actually get the value. Now we have first value from, which I think is probably a more common use case. People just want, as soon as they get the value, they just want it to resolve and be done, right? So that's what first value from will do. And last value from is more like what toPromise did. All right, another typings improvement, functions that take n arguments will behave better. And so when I say this, I mean things like of here, for example. So in RxJS 6, if you had something like of, it would take at most like somewhere between 6 and 9 arguments before it would just be like, I have no idea what to do this anymore. With this anymore, you're going to get like an observable of undefined at this point, because I have no idea what this should be, or I'm sorry, observable of unknown, or observable of like empty brackets in some cases, which is even nuttier. This now in RxJS 7, it will handle any number of arguments very neatly. Even if some of your arguments are union types or whatever, it'll figure it out. And it does a very, very good job, thanks to some very hard work from core team members like Nicholas Jamieson, who I believe is speaking later, which I'm looking forward to. So one of the problems, though, is like people would do these typings, right, where they would do something like they'd explicitly pass generic arguments to get around the fact that RxJS 6 couldn't really handle the typings. And generally speaking, going forward and just in your life, no matter what you're developing, I recommend against doing this. Like if you must, you should rather it's probably better to cast with as after the fact than it is to explicitly pass things to generics. And the reason for that is if you infer something like without those explicit generics, then you aren't going to be prone to breaking like what you're about to experience when you try to update with RxJS 7 if you're explicitly passing generics. The fix for when you run into problems here is to just remove the explicit generic that you have there. So if you have this source code or something like this and you're updating to RxJS 7 and suddenly you're seeing errors, literally just delete the explicit generic and it's probably going to work right after that. All right, updates to API consistency. So we had just these weird behaviors and there's still some things I think that are a little inconsistent in RxJS 7, but it's so much better than it was. But in particular, here's one that bothered me and it bothered a lot of other people because it was very confusing. So if I'm concatenating these 3 observables together, and you can see that of is it's emitting a value synchronously. So that first tap should synchronously fire as soon as you subscribe to that observable. So right here, and then delay is saying, okay, wait 100 milliseconds, and then it's going to send tap 1 out right after that. And then it's going to complete because this is complete. And then it's going to finalize. And what you'll see happening here in RxJS 6 is the finalization actually happens after we subscribe to the next one in the chain. So you get this whole tap 1, tap 2, wait, finalize 1, and then 2, tap 3. So we subscribe to 3 now, wait, finalize 2, and so on. So there's this really weird nonsensical behavior. And in RxJS 7, that's fixed. So now you get the tap 1, it emits 1, and then we get the finalize. And we get tap 2, it emits 2, and then we get the finalize, and so on. So much, much better behavior for this. And we've kind of cleaned this up. Anywhere that you might have to deal with this with concat map or finalize on error resume next, all of those things that concatenate things together, make sure that finalize happens in the proper order. Another thing, so speaking of finalize, this is another thing that bothered me fairly consistently about RxJS 6. So if you have two finalize operators, one after the other, they actually end up finalizing in reverse order in RxJS 5 and 6. And that was a bug that we really wanted to fix, but we were concerned that people were relying on the behavior because it's just such a weird, like, systematic thing. So now they actually are, they happen in the proper order. Now, honestly, this code here, you could probably get by with just one finalize and do both console logs in that. But regardless, this is just a finite example so you can kind of see what the problem was that we fixed. So another thing is throughout the library, we fixed how we were dealing with notifications as signals to do things. So for example, audit or sample or delay when, or maybe like take until is one that people are very familiar with, where it takes an observable, and when that observable emits, that's when the operator knows to do something. So in take until's case, it says, oh, when I get a value, I'm going to unsubscribe from this or complete my resulting observable, right? That's take until. The problem was that we had a whole bunch of operators that didn't behave the same as the other operators. Some of them would say, okay, only a value signal, a nexted event matters as a notification, and completion is just completion. And the other ones would say either completion or next count. And that second group there is wrong. We should have always had this working the proper way. And that is that an observable completion is not a value or event. It's basically the closed bracket on your array. Like, it has no meaning to the content of your array, the closed bracket, right? So it's just to tell you when the array is done. So observable complete is just to tell you when the observable is done sending you values. It is not a notification. It is not a value. So from now on, all notifiers that exist in RxJS are only notified by a next event, not by completion or next, because that just doesn't make any sense. So it's all consistent now. And here's another big one that I wanted to fix. So the story behind this is a long time ago. Removing, when you added a child subscription to another subscription, it did not remove itself when it unsubscribed. So what it would actually do in like version 5.1 is it would return a different subscription instance. And that's what you had to use to cause it to unsubscribe. If you had a child added to a parent, you had to use the return value of add and unsubscribe that in order to remove the child from the parent and unsubscribe the child. We fixed that in like version 5.2 or something like that. And all of a sudden, subscription, when you said subscription.add subscription, the return value was the same subscription that you added. So if you had parent.add child, the return value was the child. So you can see down there in the bottom right that like this was true. But people would end up using it like this, and it never did what they thought it did. People thought that they're adding each one of these subscriptions to this fella right here, and that's just not the case. What they were doing is they were adding subscription 3 to subscription 2. They were adding subscription 2 to subscription 1, and they're adding subscription 1 to this subscription, right? This never did what you thought it did. So it was the source of a lot of weird bugs, and that's fixed now because in the other thing is, okay, so subscription return, like, again, this is to go over what I was talking about before, that return value was really just to remove, either you could remove yourself if you're a child subscription, or you could remove, if you passed a handler into add, you would get a subscription back that allowed you to remove the handler. So either way, the whole thing was kind of wacky, and now it's fixed. So if you have a chain like this in version 7, you're going to see red squigglies because you can no longer make the dumb move. Like, this is not going to happen anymore. You can instead, like with the handlers also, you can add and remove them by reference, just like add event listener, remove event listener. Like this is no longer something where you have to hold on to a subscription and send it in. So both of these things are fixed. You don't have to do anything weird with them anymore in version 7. All right, so this is just a few little highlights. And by the way, that this, I don't think I explained this totally. The reason that this is no longer possible is, again, add returns voids. You're not going to get anything back from add. It doesn't make any sense to return anything from add. Maybe someday in the future, we will enable this behavior, but that's not going to be for a long time because we want to get this out of people's heads if RxJS 6 and 5 are still popularly used. So if those fade out of style, maybe we'll talk about something like this, or multiple arguments to add or something, but that's not on the plate right now. What is on the plate right now is you have to call add individually on the subscription the way you're supposed to, and you can't make the mistake this has in it. All right. So, these are just a few of the major highlights. There were very minor consistency issues that we went through and fixed. There were some things around like, delay wasn't always waiting for the last value in there in some cases. Just a bunch of little weird quirks that were filed as bugs that we were worried people were relying on, and we finally fixed. Now, let's get to this. Consolidating multicasting. Multicasting is easily the most confusing area of RxJS, to the point where I would say 80% of the time someone comes and they report a memory leak in RxJS in our comments. No, not even 80. I would bet 95% of the time people report a memory leak in RxJS. They're using share replay almost every single time. And they'll just show like the code that doesn't have share replay. And I'll be like, by any chance, do you have a share replay above it? And they're always like, oh yeah, I do. And then that was the problem. So right now we have lots of multicasting operators in RxJS 6. We've got multicast, publish replay, publish last. We're missing one in there, publish behavior. See, I forgot one. That's how many we have. There's share replay, ref count. There's just tons and tons. So actually, I'm missing one there. And then share replay has this crazy cause of confusion. So the original design for share replay, it was actually called cache back in the day. And the design for it was, what if I have this really expensive operation that I do not want to do more than once? And so the design was that once something, so it's cold until something subscribes to it, then it starts subscribing to the source. And when even if everything else unsubscribes from it, it keeps that subscription to the source until the source completes. So it can consume this expensive thing and keep it in there for you. So then the next person that subscribes doesn't subscribe to the source again. It just gets the values replayed back to them. And that was the design. That was its original intent. But then people will do things like this, where they have a never-ending observable like interval, and they will slap a share replay on it. They'll do like a take 3, and they're thinking after it takes the 3, it'll unsubscribe from that shared observable, and they're absolutely right. But then they're baffled to see that interval still going, and it's still going because it never completes in order to complete the share replay caching behavior. And this is a source of memory leaks for people. People are like, I don't understand what's going on. They really don't get it. Or they even have share replay 1 or share replay 2. Doesn't matter what it is. That's the behavior. And this is something that was originally asked for in the original design. And now we actually have a better way to do this. So I don't know if I covered this in here. I must have skipped it. But share replay actually has an option in it called ref count true. So you can pass an options object to it, and the options object, you can say share replay ref count true, and then it does reference counting to the point where if all like child or client subscribers unsubscribe from it, it will go cold again, and it'll kill the subscription to the source. So it can support that behavior, and we had to add that after the fact. And there was a whole lot of debate on whether or not it should just always do that. And it was the whole community was split 50-50. So we have this kind of dual behavior of share replay, and it's magic, and it's hard for people to understand. It's a bit of nonsense. So we've added to the share operator configuration. So now share, the share that you know and love that doesn't have weird memory leak problems and is kind of simple when you just call it by itself, can have this optional configuration attached to it. And it allows you to do things like change what subject you're connecting through, or define the reset behaviors. Should I reset on ref count 0? Should I reset on complete? Should I reset on error true? And you can set all of these things. So you can actually define, so this is a replay, this is the same as share replay with ref count true. So you can totally define this behavior, the exact behavior that you want, and actually be able to read in your code what the behavior is supposed to be when the ref count hits 0 or the reset is complete or whatever. Like, so you can build it. This is now share, it's share replay, it's share behavior, if you like, share through my crazy subject, share that only resets on complete. You can configure it however you want, and it's a single operator. And actually, the new share replay is literally based off of this. It's the same operator, it's just a wrapper around it. Another thing that we have with multicasting was we have publish variants and multicast, and they returned a connectable observable. And with pipe, that didn't make a whole ton of sense, right? Because pipe returns an observable. So you'd end up having to cast it as a connectable observable so you could call connect on it later on to actually connect the source to whatever is listening to it. And now we actually have a creation function called connectable, where you can pass any observable to it and it makes it a connectable observable. So you don't have to do, anything special with this. And it's configurable, right? You can say what sort of subject you'd like to connect to. And notice it has exactly the same sort of configuration object as share does. So it says connector, you give it a factory function, you can return a brand new subject, or you can return a subject that you've closed over, or whatever you want inside there, and kind of define that behavior. And then you get back a connectable observable that you can connect. And you're no longer trying to chain things like publish or multicast through pipe, where it doesn't really understand what to do with the connectable observable. So we are keeping all of these for now, including publish behavior, which I omitted from this. I'm sorry. We're keeping them from now, but we've improved share and we've added connectable. And we're going to we've deprecated everything that you see with the line through it here. So including publish behaviors also deprecated because we want to remove them in version 8. Share replay, we're not deprecating only because it's so popular, but it is full of foot guns. We want to discourage people from using it and tell people to use share instead. And as we see the popularity of share replay wane, we will probably end up deprecating it as well, but it's going to be around for the foreseeable future. And we really just recommend that people stick with share and connectable for most of their use cases. Probably share in almost all cases. Connectable is kind of an edge casey thing where you actually want to have to call connect on something or whatever. So kind of like one multicast to rule them all, you have share. Now, another thing about multicasting is there actually is a little known publish. It's a thing about all the publish variants that a lot of people don't know about or don't use. And it's been there since version 5 was released. And it's that you can pass a selector to it to do all your multicasting within the selector. And that looks like this. So generally speaking, you have the selector and you're expected to return an observable that somehow uses your shared observable, usually in more than one way. Usually you do it with a merge or whatever, but what it does is it executes this callback and sets up the share and then subscribes to whatever comes back inside here and then calls connect under the hood. That's what this does. So then you end up getting back an observable of whatever this flattens to. And it's just not something that people really use widely. So that's why I didn't include it in the other part of this talk. And I actually didn't even mention this in my last talk about RxJS 7, but it exists on every single one of the published variants. Oh wait, no, it doesn't. We forgot to put it on publish last and publish behavior, and no one ever said anything about it. That's how I know nobody's really using these. But so it only exists on share replay, multicast, and publish. And as I stated before, we're deprecating all of these anyways, because yeah, we could add these, but we're already going to deprecate it. And this is how many variants that we have right now with like how you can use things and the different ways that they can be used and kind of slightly different behaviors. And it's really ugly. And instead, we're trying to get to where we're just using these two in green here, share and connectable. So we're going to have to add one more to accommodate this publish selector behavior that most people don't know about, but we still need to make sure that we're still covering that base and we're not leaving people hanging out to dry that are using it. In Connect, it looks very much the same. And just, I've got some arrows here to kind of run it down. We've got our source up here at the top. Here's our new connect operator, and like it's going to call this whole callback before the connection. It also has configuration down here where, again, you've got this connector argument where you can specify the type of subject you want to connect through. And then inside of here, you take your shared observable and you do something with it and return a new observable that gets subscribed to, and it calls connect for you after the fact, and everything that's is flattened that comes out of the results. So something to play with. It covers some weird corner cases. Again, most of the time you're just going to want to use share, especially now that it's so configurable. So that's the long run plan is you're just going to have share and connectable and connect, which, you know, just fewer, more flexible APIs. You're down to these right here, and that's the stark difference. So we'll have 3 multicasting operators or functions as opposed to all of these different variations. Some of them are the same operator, but they behave differently depending on how they're called, whether they're called with a selector or not. So we're narrowing it down to make it a lot smarter, a lot cleaner, a lot easier, and actually a lot smaller. All right, another thing to talk about, new conversions are supported. So you can now convert async iterable and readable streams to observables, just like you can with promises or arrays or iterables. So what is an async iterable? A lot of people don't know what this is. An async iterable has an interface that looks kind of like this. It is an object with a next on it, and the next will give you back a promise to an iteration result. So that's a promise to an object that has a done Boolean on it to tell you whether or not it's done, and or a value on it. So very much like an iterator, only it's asynchronous. It's delayed by this promise. It also has a symbol on it for us to know that it's an async iterable. And these actually come most commonly these days from async generator functions, which come from async function star. Now, async generators are a different animal. I'm not going to get into all of that is with like coroutines and, you know, asynchronous coroutines and that sort of stuff. But you can do things like this, where you can actually have an async function star, and you can have like a little, you can await like a sleep in here or something like that, and then yield over and over again. And this yield causes a promise to come out of your async iterable, and, you know, with this value in it. So like this is going to return an async iterable of numbers, right? That has like some sort of delay depending on how long you pass in here in between the numbers coming out of it. And where do we have async iterable support? Pretty much anywhere that we accept an observable. So from, obviously, and then places like defer, merge map, concat map. And it's just an interesting new thing that comes, it came very, very cheap for us to add this to the library. And async function star is, of course, native in JavaScript. And so it's very cool. It's not without its foot guns because it's promise based, and I could go into a whole diatribe about that, but we support it now, and it enables you to do some pretty interesting, cool stuff. So you can have interesting patterns like this, where I can literally switch map, and instead of returning an observable in there, I can actually just give switch map an async function star, like an async generator. So you can see here, this is me running the code over here in this video, and you hit start, the button click starts, and then every time you hit start again, it interrupts this, and like you've got this sleep in between, and it's just yielding different numbers every time. But it's just an interesting thing. This yield is actually pushing values out of the observable. So kind of cool. All right, readable stream. This is mostly for fetch. There are some other ways you can create readable streams, but primarily it's for fetch. And this was just a really easy win after we added async iterator, because readable streams API, especially the reader API that comes off the readable stream, is so so very similar to an async iterator that it was just a few lines of code to really get this to work. So it was an easy win, and we put it in there. So if you're using from fetch now in the selector, or even in, switch map or whatever you have after that, you can return the response body there. I think various media APIs for the DOM also use readable stream, or you can create a readable stream from scratch if you so choose. I don't know why you do that, but you could. And those will just work with RxJS, and it was very, very cheap and easy for us to add. All right, a lot of people are excited about this one, animation frames. So animation frames is just, it's a new way to create an observable of animation frames that give you something useful, as opposed to before people had to know like these secret recipes where they would do like timer or interval or using the animation frame scheduler and this and that. That was a smell. Like that was basically people like knowing about the internal inner workings of RxJS, the library, or the inner workings of range, or the inner workings of say like interval, and then leveraging it with this recipe with an animation. That's silly. Instead, now we have an animation frames function that returns an observable of animation frames that give you something useful. And it looks like this. So you can call animation frames, and it returns an observable that when you subscribe to it, gives you the time elapsed in a high resolution timestamp since you subscribe. So the timestamp is the same timestamp you would get from animation frames. So that's kind of since your page started, if you will. But the elapsed time is the high resolution time since the subscription happened. So that's a very, very useful thing when making animations. And here's like a small example. So in this example, I made like a clock, and I'm sorry if it's flickering a little bit over the video here, but it's very smooth in real life. And I've got a link here that you can click on when you want to try it again. But you can see in here, I can do things like be like, oh, take the elapsed time and do a take while. Elapsed is less than duration. So I know when I want to stop my animation. And then in here, I just have a tab that says, okay, well, I want to have this side effect in here of setting the rotation on my hand, right? So I'm taking the elapsed divided by the duration to give me some sort of variant that I'm using on like how much I want to rotate it. So as long as you get the math in, you can do some pretty cool stuff. So again, this link will be there for you to kind of play with and check out. It's really, really fun to play with the animation stuff. I made this while I was playing around with it, and I thought maybe I'll walk through this code, and no. So I've got the stacklets here, but you can see like this is all using the animation things. I've kind of coordinated it together to where as the mouse is moving or as touch moves happen, it generates these, and this is all DOM. And then when I click, they fade out. So it plays a different animation when I click the page. So it's just really, really fun to play with RxJS in this. And this was only, I don't know, maybe I think 100 lines of code or something like that. It wasn't too bad to write all that. So lots of fun. I'll watch that one more time just because I like it so much. But yeah, tons of fun to play with that. So when you get the slides, do click on this link and fork it and fiddle around. So other new features, just to round up. So I already talked about async iterable support and readable stream support, animation frames, lots of fun. A whole bunch of improvements to Ajax. There's a couple of breaking changes, but our Ajax that we're exporting now, honestly, is on par with things like Axios. We still don't really support Node out of the box. Like in order to get our Ajax implementation to work with Node, you would have to use like XHR implementation that was written for Node and just kind of inject it. But this is so small to add. So if you're already JS, using our Ajax library that's very, very full featured now, only costs you about 4 kilobytes. So it's definitely worth checking out. It's definitely worth using. I've used it in a variety of applications now already. We also added switch scan, which is a bit of fun. We'll go over what that does. There was an outcry about use cases for that after we had merge scan, which I've personally never used merge scan in any app that I've worked on, but I know people who have. But just kind of round things out, and it was switch scan came at no real cost because we could use the same internals that we used for switch map in order to make it. Combine latest object. So this is a new one in RxJS 7. So similar to what we did with fork join, where fork join can take an array or an object, combine latest can now also take an array or an object. And that's so it will output like the same shaped object with the values in it, right? We've got first value from, last value from, which I talked about before. Those are promise conversion functions. There's two new configuration options. One's called on stopped notification, and the other one's on unhandled error. And these are both kind of the same vein. The main use cases for these would be to log random things you didn't expect to happen in your RxJS. So on stopped notification, that gets called if for some reason, let's just say you are calling complete on a subject and the act of completing the subject causes something to next into it. In that moment, the subject is stopped but not closed, and it's going to be like, oh, like I don't know what to do with this. And there's a whole bunch of spots where this could happen in RxJS, and it's just kind of a weird fluke sort of thing that can happen. But previous versions of RxJS would not let you know that this thing happened, and you want to know that it happened because that means code is probably executing you didn't mean to execute. And now there's actually a place for us to handle that and to look at it. There's also on unhandled error, which is a configuration point for exactly what it sounds like. If you don't add an error handler to your subscription, then it's going to be rethrown in another call stack currently. If you want to handle that before it's rethrown, in all cases, you can do that in this configuration point. And it's global configuration, but it's primarily used for things like logging. We also have changed around throw error. Something a lot of people don't know, and I actually tweeted about this a while ago because it surprised me, is the moment you create an error, if you say new error in JavaScript, whether it's in Rx or wherever, just in any JavaScript code, it's going to capture all of the closed over state in whatever function context that you happen to be in and store it in memory until you read the stack of your error. So you do not want to keep it, you don't want to create a new error and just keep it around forever. And the previous version of throw error required you to pass an error to it. And what that means is that you would create an error, you'd capture all of everything that was in memory at that point and keep it in memory until throw error actually did something with that error, and then somebody read it, like read in particular the stack property off of it. And this is just a quirk of V8 in particular. Now, what you want to do is only create errors right before you're going to throw them and use them, or throw them and get rid of them, because otherwise you're going to end up, with these memory leaks like that. So throw error now takes a factory function, and that's how we recommend using it. So you give it a factory function, and when it's subscribed to, it calls that factory function, creates the error, and then passes it out, as opposed to you creating the error way in advance and giving it to the observable. We also have the configurable share and connectable, and what's not on this list is, I've already talked about, which is connect. So that's the other operator that did the same thing as that publish selector variant. All right, so that's pretty much everything in RxJS 7. There's a lot more to kind of figure out, as far as like, there's nothing to figure out. There's a lot more for you to explore as far as, very minor breaking changes and stuff. It's all highly documented on the website now and easy to find. I want to talk a little bit about what's going to happen after RxJS 7. So this is something we haven't talked about at all. And the biggest thing that's going to happen in RxJS 8 is we're going to remove deprecated APIs. We want to, during this time period, focus on trying to improve API readability. We've got things right now like group by. It takes 4 arguments and no one can really tell what they all are when they're in your code, right? So making these things named arguments and doing things to try to help make RxJS code more readable is something that we want to do. We want to continue to think about bundle sizes and trying to make things smaller. Documentation is going to be a big focus. I've actually started last year in the fall on creating really comprehensive documentation. There's still a PR out for it. I had to stop to focus on RxJS 7 some more, but getting out some really solid documentation on the do's and don'ts, gotchas, good patterns, when you should use Rx and when you shouldn't, and like some honest advice around that sort of thing. That's all going to land in our docs. And, just kind of focusing, again, I already mentioned this, to just trying to improve readability or give people advice on how to improve readability around RxJS. A lot of people that hate RxJS only hate the readability of the operator chains for the most part. They don't hate observable. They hate like big, huge wads of gobbledygook. So we want to help people figure out how to make those things better. We also want to keep an eye out for modernization things. So if for some reason the pipeline operator looks like it's making some traction, I don't know if that'll be the case, but trying to make sure that we're aiming towards wherever JavaScript's going in the future. We want to try to steer the ship that way, because so many people use this. 25 million downloads a week right now, that we have to steer the ship very slowly, so we don't break a whole ton of people in the process. Another thing we're talking about is a single import site, or abort signal support. So just some things like RxJS 8 size speculation. So I went through and I removed all the deprecated APIs just to see what it looked like and built with everything in it. And it removed about 10 kilobytes. That's just removing the deprecated APIs. It's no other changes than that. It removed about 10 kilobytes from the library. So it made it much smaller, like right out of the gate, maybe somewhere between 8 and 10. We'll just say 10, but it was a good amount. And it would only get smaller in between now and then, because there's other stuff we can do to make things smaller. So it'll be really cool. Not to mention the surface area is so much better. And then what if we only had one import site? So right now we have deep imports. It causes some weird headaches in different IDEs. It causes some weird headaches in our package that we put out. And it causes some weird headaches in like people not knowing where certain things are. And now we finally have names and everything, where we don't have two versions of things called race. We have race and race with and whatever, that we're able to target, potentially moving everything to where you just only import things from RxJS, no RxJS/operators or whatever. So that's something we're going to have to come up with a strategy to get people to move that direction. And we're talking about doing that very seriously right now. And then abort signal support. Abort signal shipped with fetch and now exists in Node and all major browsers except for IE, which I would not call a major browser anymore. So we have this cancellation thing that's very similar to subscriptions, and it can be used as a token. And as this cancellation thing becomes more popular, what if we leveraged it? Then we wouldn't have to ship subscriptions anymore. And there would be kind of one cancellation mechanism to rule them all. And we could use them in a variety of places, like on subscribe, or on for each, or in first and last value from, that sort of thing. So it's a really cool thing. We're really hot on it. We're kind of watching what the ecosystem does with abort signal. And this really strongly looks like a direction we might want to go. But we have to figure out how to transition there slowly over time without breaking people. So there might be some dual mode for a while where there's both subscriptions and abort signal support or whatever, but we'll figure that out. It's not a real rush to get there, but it is something we're looking at. So again, version 8 is a ways off. So you don't have to worry about anything I just said there, but it's just so you have an idea of what the timeline looks like. Version 7, again, was in beta for more than a year, actually much more than a year. So I think it was like April 4th of last year was when the first beta 0 of version 7 was released. I really, really want to thank so many amazing people that helped make version 7 possible. It was not just me doing this. Nicholas Jamieson did a ton of work on the types. Lots of work for this list you see here was kind of an order of total commits, but there was a lot of interactions and stuff. This is not a comprehensive list. There are people who interacted and gave us feedback and things on GitHub that are not in this commit list. And of course, there's all the people that committed before them. This is just kind of a slice from the last a little bit more than a year. Just so very thankful for all the help that we had to ship this version. It's a far cry from a long time ago when it was, just Paul Taylor and I working on it, and there was like 10 downloads, and then Paul left Netflix, and it was kind of me on my own for a little while, and then OJ joined, and like it was it's so much better. It's so much more lively in the issues and stuff, and it's great to see some new faces contributing. And hopefully, we'll see the core team grow and stuff over these next few years as we move towards version 8. So thank you very much. RxJS 7 is out right now. If you go and you npm install RxJS at latest or npm install RxJS, you are going to get version 7. Please keep in mind, though, that it requires TypeScript 4.2. Without TypeScript 4.2, you will get some funky errors. Like right now, I know that if you go play with StackBlitz, I think StackBlitz is still in TypeScript 4.0 or something like that, and they're rushing to update 4.2. It should be StackBlitz should be updated in the next day or two, I've heard. So really, really cool stuff. The docs are all updated. Please feel free to go out there and check things out. If you play with the StackBlitzes there, they might not work for a day or two because of that whole TypeScript issue, but start a local project, play with it. It's so much cleaner, so much nicer. I've been using it, of course, in my projects since it's been in beta. And this also, so you know, is what Google has been using RxJS 7 in production for months and months and months and months now, because they actually, just like Angular, they sync that off of our master branch. So they've been ahead of the curve for quite a while. But if you get this out now, you will actually be ahead of them. So it's very stable, very small, very clean, and I'm super, super pleased with all the work that everybody's done to get us there. So thank you very much. Stop sharing.
Okay. Ben, before we take some of the questions, I'm just gonna thank some of our sponsors. Hang on a second. Give me a chance to share this screen. Okay. So we have a few sponsors who helped us with the event. We have Adoptive, and you heard from their co-founder and CEO earlier. We will play that video again around lunchtime. And thank you also to the Narwhal folks, NX Dev Tools. You can check them out at nx.dev. Hero Devs as well. And Outsmartly. So Jay Phelps, who was one of the speakers at the last London event, is a co-founder of Outsmartly. And Ben and Jay are best friends, as far as I know. Okay, we're gonna take some questions. I don't think there's a lot though, but yeah, we'll see what we have. Let me just go to YouTube and pick some of the questions. Give me a second. Okay. I think there's one here about TC39. Let me just pull that up.
Oh boy.
Actually, before that, Ben, so there is a comment here from Angular Rocks. They're from Australia, actually. So what is the actual number? This is the current number, or is it higher?
I checked earlier today. Let's see if I go to npm. Look at the package. It said something like there was. Right now, it's saying that there is $20 million. Right now, it's saying 20 million downloads for the last week. And then but as of yesterday, it was 25 million downloads. So it kind of depends on what day you're on. So,
right. Okay.
So somewhere I'd say 22 million downloads a week is probably what we're averaging, I guess.
Okay. Well, that's pretty good, isn't it?
yeah, it's good. It's a little intimidating to see that. So.
Yeah, I was just, when I was having a chat with Adoptive earlier, we were chatting about that, and I was saying to him that this is incredible because it's obviously used by a lot of people, and it's maintained by a small team who are all volunteers, right? No one's paid to do this.
Yeah, 100% volunteer. I wished I could get paid for it many times, and I've taken a few jobs where I thought I was going to get paid for it, but I've not going to happen.
Who knows? Maybe the next one.
Maybe.
Well, it's probably difficult to leave the current one, right? It
Yeah.
pays very
I'm
well,
not.
I'm
We're not.
sure.
It's.
I'm sure.
I mean, I'm not super worried about it. I
Mhm.
mean, we were clearly able to ship this.
Yeah,
But like the number of downloads, so the size, the number of people that depend on this library means that, and it's hard for some people to understand. It means that we have to be very slow and measured in what we do and consider every, because if we push out a patch, right, that has a fix in it that is in any way breaking, then overnight we break like 1 million builds or something like that, and then in the morning there's an actual tangible cost of like, paying engineers all over the world to sit and figure out why their build's broken. So
yeah,
um,
yeah.
their build's broken because they're not using lock files, by the way, if their build's broken because of that. But like yeah, there's we have to be a little bit more slow and measured than you could be with, your own private open source project that you might be publishing that's only used by a couple hundred people or
Yeah,
whatever. So
exactly. You don't want to be, having production issues here and there
right.
because the team has been careless. Definitely. I mean, it's the same like any like private company, right? Small or big,
Yeah.
but you always have to be careful. Okay, let me see what questions. So this one here. Um, I think I saw you tweeting about this. Well,
So
several times. Probably
so that,
several
all right,
times right over there.
we're
Right.
gonna like, so real talk about the TC39. The TC39 is an organization with paid membership. And I don't recall exactly what it costs. I think it's like $20,000 or something like that. A company has to pay. So in order to get a vote in the TC39, you have to be a member of a paying company. And if none of those paying companies um, wish to prioritize any given proposal because it doesn't benefit them or because they don't have time to deal with it or for any number of reasons, there's no one to champion the proposal. So the proposal itself is not dead. It lacks a champion. I've been approached about it, but I'm not a member of the TC39, and therefore, like, it would just kind of be like yelling into the wind, in my opinion. Like, I don't know. I don't know that for a fact, but I've got a strong inkling that that's exactly what it'd be, and it's a lot of work to get one of these proposals through. So it's not dead. There are other proposals that I think are probably more beneficial for the RxJS community, um, which one of which is the pipeline operator, which
Mhm.
is, again, it's another one that's kind of stalled. The only company that wants to push forward is kind of pushing forward a version that I don't think would benefit the community very much. But that one is the most promising right now, and it's got some traction, but not a lot. And again, it has to do with how the TC39 is structured. Um, it's a paid membership sort of thing. They do listen to feedback on GitHub. If you really want these things, get active on GitHub, comment a lot, like thumbs up a lot, like talk about how this could benefit you at your company. And they do pay attention, and it will help. Now, again, it's a paid membership thing, so it's a bit of an ivory tower. So you have to convince people in the ivory tower to do your bidding. It's not exactly democracy, but um, hopefully these things turn around. So it's not dead, but it is stagnant right now until
Yeah.
someone picks it up. It was not shot down. It just lost its champion, and like therefore is now like stopped for the time being.
Isn't there a way for like the community to be like, I don't know, like a member somehow collectively?
Yeah, you just have to pay
That would be nice, right?
the ECMA or whatever, and then you can, if you have a company and you can pay the ECMA, you can be a member of the TC39. So I don't know. Maybe I should do. I mean, I should start a fundraiser and join the the TC39. I don't think
Yeah.
people really want me on the TC39 though. I
Yeah.
because of this issue and because of the pipeline operator, like I say snarky things sometimes about the chances of certain things getting through, and I would be like a fly in their ointment, I'm sure. But
Yeah.
yeah, the individuals on the TC39, by the way, are all kind, lovely, brilliant people, it has nothing to do with the individuals on that team why these things are stalled. It's like really it's more of an organizational issue, and like who has the money and the time to push these things through, because you have to, it takes time. It takes a lot of time to get these proposals in.
Yeah.
You have to have a lot of free time. And let me tell you something, as an open source contributor right now, volunteering your free time for tech work is not super lucrative for your life or anything. It has to be, it has to be your passion. Like it has to be.
Related to that, let me show it on the screen.
All right. So how do you balance work? So, all right. So what I do is I work really hard until I burn out, and then I don't work at all for a long time. And no, it's a good question. So like full-time, I'd say early on when I was at Netflix, they gave me a lot of leeway, probably too much leeway. And I worked on RxJS probably more than they wanted me to. And I never got in trouble for it or anything like that, but I'm sure that I probably should have focused more on Netflix work and less on RxJS. Although part of what I was doing at Netflix was for RxJS, so it was a very flexible position. At Google, I'm mostly focused on Google's work, and I had to kind of do RxJS stuff on the side, and that sort of became the MO. So at Citadel, I don't even talk about it really at work. I did this last couple of days because the last couple of days were a big couple of days, the first major release in the last 3 years for RxJS. But otherwise, I never bring it up. I try not to mention too much about how I work on it unless someone needs help with RxJS related stuff, and I see them in Slack or whatever. But like, yeah, I put a strong dividing line between the two. The real thing that I have to balance isn't necessarily work in RxJS. It's balancing being a dad and a normal human being in RxJS. Like that's a lot harder. And especially when I get really excited about something in RxJS, and then I realize I can easily get hyper focused on it and burn out. So I have to be careful and make sure that I'm taking breaks and making sure I'm spending time with my kids, or maybe don't work on it until after they go to bed or whatever. That's more of the balance problem than the work. I just try to focus solely on work and not worry too much about the open source stuff, other than occasionally I have to have meetings during the workday about it, which I just make sure is scheduled, and I don't really have any problems with that, because if you hire an open source maintainer for a major project, open source project, it's like hiring someone with pre-existing conditions, right? Like that they're going to have things that come up because of their open source. It's not if you want somebody to be 100% there all the time, don't hire an open source maintainer. But for the most part, I would say 98% of the time I'm worried about work during work. So
okay. Yeah, sometimes I see you working late, really late nights, right?
Yeah.
That's RxJS then.
I got the bags under my eyes.
Okay, there's another question here. I think he's got two questions. So this is the first one. Is this right? If you want to multicast, okay, you read that, right? And then I'm gonna show the other question.
All right, so these are related questions for sure. So you can what Pedro is showing here is, this is basically, you're doing share with like the normal behavior of share, but share usually has a subject underneath there. This is now using share with a behavior subject underneath there. So you get the exact same behavior that share has had for a long time. Only instead of having a subject under the hood, you have a behavior subject, which means as new subscribers subscribe, they get the previous value and so on and so forth. The previous question, I think, was about, what should you use? Honestly, what Pedro is showing you here, 99% of the time, that's what you're going to want is to use share. Where share falls on its face is when you're dealing with completely synchronous observables. If you're dealing with something completely synchronous, then you want to use connectable or connect or one of these other things. But like, honestly, if you're doing completely synchronous observables, and I'm saying this not as the author of RxJS, but just as like a tech lead sort that has to review PRs, like, what are you doing? Like, you probably should not be using RxJS on totally synchronous stuff. There are use cases for doing that. Like, say you have to do something very memory intense that, you don't want to create a bunch of intermediary arrays or something. So you're trying to use it as like a processing pipeline. But those use cases are kind of thin and far between. Like, really, RxJS is meant for asynchrony. And so in all asynchronous cases, share is your friend. Like, it's totally configurable. You can make it do exactly what you want. In fact, there's even PRs and discussions right now about making it so the reset on ref count not only can take a Boolean of like true or false, but can take like a function that returns an observable. So you can say, hey, like, wait this long before you actually reset or something like that. So there's proposals to do some interesting stuff.
Okay. Right. So there are a few comments. One, for example, this one from Manila. We've got a lot of people from like different places in Asia, Australia, India, Malaysia, Japan. I think Thailand, I believe, Vietnam. Yeah. So awesome talks. There's a lot of thank yous here for you, Ben, for all the work that you do. So
that's great.
Good. Okay.
I'm always shocked and amazed when I see people from all over the world using this stuff. Like, it's, from a small town kid from Michigan, it's kind of wild to even think that I've made something that somebody is using that far away from home. It's very, very interesting.
It's great. Okay. We've got another question here. We probably have like around 8 minutes. So yeah, still have a bit of time.
All right. So the question here is, the async generator pattern is interesting. What type of applications do you see taking advantage of this in the future? So it really depends. Like, here's the thing. It's promise based. So if you have an async generator function, anywhere that you've got an await in there, it could pause an indefinite amount of time, and there's no cancellation. So, it really just kind of depends. I think one of the more interesting applications of it is situations where you don't necessarily care about cancellation, but you want to use some promised APIs that you already have. And like, maybe you want to be like, okay, so call this thing and then yield a value, and then call this other thing and then yield a value. So I think that it'll be an interesting point for like solving problems where you're like, oh, I want to run this function once and only once per, like make sure that everything is executing this function is only executing once at a time. So just in order. So I'm going to use concatenap, but then I want to control what it's emitting while still using these other promise APIs. So then I'm going to use an async generator function on the inside of it. I think that's a really, really interesting application. The problem tends to become like the lack of cancellation, which RxJS kind of makes up for because it can ignore everything that comes out of it, but that doesn't mean that the code inside the generator function isn't still executing. So it's an interesting thing. I have used it in the past in a couple times for small use cases, exactly like where I described, where I had some promise-based API and I had to call it a couple times in a loop or whatever and emit something right after, and it just ended up being like kind of a small, clean way to solve the problem as opposed to what I would do with operators to get it done. But it certainly is it is a super interesting thing, and I recommend people use it. One thing I don't see people use even beyond the async generator is just using async functions inside of like concatenap or defer or something like that. Like, people don't often think about, well, I could make an observable out of this async function by just passing it to defer, and all of a sudden now I've got an observable that executes this async function and gives me the result when it's done. So the async generator is more of the same vein, where you can do, it's just another kind of interesting way to create an observable, probably more at the head, and just but you do have to pay attention to the cancellation side of things because it doesn't exist in generator because it's promise based.
So we also have Matt Podwiswoki as one of our speakers, and he's got one I think comment here. I'm just gonna don't know if you wanna comment
Oh
on
yeah,
it.
totally. I'm doing Matt a disservice here. IXJS is like a sister library to RxJS. So IXJS is based off of async intervals, and always has been. And IXJS does have deep cancellation with abort signals. Async generator functions, specifically what I was talking about, async generator functions are what don't have cancellation. So if you want to use async intervals, IXJS is your thing. Like it's really great if you want to deal with things like back pressure on like a node service or something like that, or like even in a worker thread where you don't care about you don't care about maximizing out that thread as much as you would say the UI thread or something like that. IXJS is a really, really strong solution for if you're interested in async iterators. Check that out for sure.
Okay. There's a question here. Actually, I can answer this question because our next speaker actually has a lot of interesting courses. I believe in Udemy, right? But are there other tutorials that you might want to mention, Ben? Or I know you
I
also
tend to
do training,
steer
right?
clear from doing that. And the main reason is I know so many people that work very hard on these things, and I don't want to be like, oh yeah, do this one, and then
Yeah.
forget
Yeah.
forget to mention somebody else's, right? So I always kind of balk at that. Of course, because I know Deborah's right after me. You can always check out Deborah's materials. I've personally interacted with her on some of the things that she's worked on, and I know it's pretty good stuff. So I'll plug her because she's right after.
You're
But
gonna otherwise.
there's so many great stuff. There's so many great companies, and
Yeah.
most of the major companies that you have out there, the plural sites and the eggheads and whatever of the world, have some really good RxJS material. I don't want to
Yeah, of course.
totally forget anybody's stuff. So
But plugging, there is we've arranged a training with Ben on May 27 to 28, and we're actually giving two places away, for attendees of this conference. So I posted a form on the chat, and we'll post it, throughout the day as well, so that people can add their details if you're interested in being part of
yeah.
it.
To my workshop, right? Yeah. So you can always come to the workshop. And so people know my workshops for years. Any workshop I've ever done, I don't take a profit. I donate my profits to charity. So
Yes, exactly. So this is your second, training that you're doing for us, workshops that you're doing for us, and so basically, Ben's donating his profit to some of the women in tech and girls in tech projects that we have. So thanks a lot for that, Ben. One of them actually is called Tech Girls Summit. We haven't launched that yet. We were supposed to launch that not last year, the year before, but we were so close to like the start of 2020, and then yeah, pandemic happened, so we have postponed that. But as soon as we're back into in person, we'll definitely look into launching that. And thanks again, Ben, for that. The one last question here about migration. Okay.
All right. So the question is, what's your take on the difficulty of upgrading RxJS from version 6 to version 7? Can other library maintainers upgrade RxJS without breaking a sweat? So one of the things I take part in is I help Google, even though they're not paying me and I don't work for Google anymore, update their version of RxJS inside of Google. So Google has thousands and thousands and thousands of build targets, like thousands of projects that are using RxJS internally. So I have personally seen everything break that could break. And, we've made fixes in our RxJS along the way to try to make that easier. So they're kind of the guinea pigs for everybody else. And I can say, if you're updating one project, as long as you have TypeScript updated, that's step one. If you can update TypeScript, then once you're there updating RxJS, generally speaking, within a single project is pretty easy. You're looking at, a few problems here and there, probably just a half hour of work at most. It just depends on your project, of course, and how much RxJS you use. If you're updating like an entire company's worth of projects, then you might have some work on your hands. Like it might be like if you've got a big mono repository like Google does, obviously no one has anything quite like Google, but if you've got, dozens and dozens of projects that are all using RxJS and you want to try to update them all at once, you're probably going to have a bad day. But overall, I mean, most of what I see are things like things that I mentioned in this talk, where people are calling subject next without a value, but the subject was subject of number, and they had just, generally speaking, they just have to go and they have to fix their types. So there's no, like, the majority of the changes we deprecated stuff, but we didn't really remove anything this time. So there shouldn't be anything like that. So it should be fairly smooth. A lot of the fixes are just going in where you've explicitly had generics before to get the types right. You just delete the explicit generic and things just work after that. So all in all, it's not too bad, other than some mind-bending TypeScript stuff, which happens from time to time, which anyone who uses TypeScript enough has probably had to deal with at one point or another, but not too bad.
So it doesn't sound like it's too painful then.
No.
Okay. Right. So I think that's the last question we can take. There are other questions.
Watch that guy send me a nasty email. I tried to update RxJS the other day, and it took me like 4 hours. Like to see. I tried this. It took me a week. I can already see the mean emails coming, but no, it shouldn't be that bad. It really, really shouldn't.
As I always say, to people, you are not paid. A lot of like maintainers are not paid to do this, so people have to be patient.
Yeah.
They're getting this for free, so they have to be patient. Unfortunately,
yeah, they still have my sympathy though. Like if something is really bad, you can try message me. I do recommend going on Stack Overflow, because you're going to get an answer a lot faster. But if it's that awful, you can try messaging me. It takes me a while to respond because I get a lot of messages from people. But I do actually try to answer everybody's questions, anybody that sends me something about RxJS. So
incredible. You're awesome. All right, Ben, we're gonna have to wrap up. But there are questions on the chat. I don't know I think you're planning to stay for a bit.
Yeah.
So if you have time, if you can respond to some of the questions on YouTube live chat, that'll be great.
Okay,
and
great.
Thanks a lot again. I'm gonna bring in Deborah. Hi, Deborah.
Hey.
How are you?
Deborah.
I'm doing okay. How are you?
Good.
I'm not going to bring up. I know why you're sad, and I'm not going to bring it up.
I brought it up just now, but anyway.
I sort of meta brought it up. I was trying not to, and it came out anyway. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm trying not to. I brought it up anyway.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ben, and we'll see you on the chat. Yeah.
Yep.